Hi, and welcome to this new episode of Darker Days Radio Dark Iron, and it is another episode of Heroes and Villains of Warmachine, and today we're talking about the Old Witch of Kador. So the Old Witch is this ancient primal being who I guess is kind of like a god, maybe is a god. It's up in the air. Needless to say, she existed in Cairn before even, or at least witnessed the rising of mankind, the rising of the other races, such as the Trollkin, the children of Duania, and the children of the Devourer Worm. And in the area that we know as Kador, and in the specific region which will become known as Umbrae, she lurked there in the caves, watching, feasting upon mankind, listening to them, learning their ways. And through this, she eventually changed her shape. So before then, she was mostly some strange, animalistic, primeval creature of the of folklore, essentially. But she slaked her thirst on the blood of humans and then became more like them, even becoming caring for those that live within her, what she would consider her territory. Now, it means, having lived for so long, she has witnessed many things. She's witnessed the invasion of the Orgoth. The first time round, she witnessed the comings and going of Torok and his progeny. But she also witnessed the creation of the Defiers. She was there when the Defiers made their kind of rebellion against Menoth and made their vow to return and to reap the souls of those who were evil and who had sold themselves to higher powers. This rang true to her, this prophecy, and something that she would remember for eons later. So, as time passed, she would then see the first priest king Kardovic, who would then be the forerunner to those lands that would become Kador. Her legend then stretches over 3,000 years, coming and going amongst the people of Old Umbrae and in Kador, advising tribal leaders, kings, various other spiritual leaders. Now, over this time, she gets a name. She becomes known as Zevanna Agha. And with the coming of the Orgoth, she maintained her lands, and the Orgoth really had very little luck penetrating into her territories, as she was this entity that was capable of repelling even them. Though, of course, things have changed in the modern age, and the Orgoth are much stronger than they have been in the past, and present a risk to all of those that she protects. Now, with the Orgoth having been repelled by the allied forces of the various thousand cities, then we have the formation of the Iron Kingdoms, and it's around this time and onwards, that she then is seen often with her own warjack, or at least a steamjack of sorts, that is just simply known as Scrapjack, cobbled together from various bits that the Old Witch, has scavenged from battlefields. Also, it carries for her many goods that she uses in her own rituals and mystical workings. Now, the interesting things about Zevanna Agha is that her own power predates the gift of magic. And also, she doesn't rely on prayers to gods. So it's interesting that she perhaps represents even something that mankind may well have evolved from, but in their evolution forgot what magic was. Maybe this is why she has so much power, much like Menoth. It's all up in the air, nothing confirmed. But her use of magic is separate from those ways of either divine magic or the magic of Thamar or some other workings. So, of course, the Old Witch commands a lot of respect within Cador. She's crowned kings, she has given counsel to tribal leaders, and because of the respect given back to her for her advice, she is, in return, given many resources. So even the Empress of Cador is willing to give her her own forces to lead. So Cadoran soldiers, warjacks, and warcasters even fall under her command to use in battle for her own schemes, which are believed to be for the benefit of Cador, as much as anyone else can understand what the Old Witch is up to at any point anyway. In many ways, the Old Witch represents a balance between the old ways of the wilderness and civilization of the cities, and reminding Cadorans of that balance, whereas she comes often into conflict with the Devourer Worm and the Circle Orboros and the Blackclads, who would rather just have everyone go back to the more feral nature of the wilderness. And so it makes her quite different to Menoth as well. For Menoth, as a god, wants his worshippers to take his gifts of the sheaf, the wall, fire, and use those to create civilization. But as we know, these are shackles of also on humanity's soul, because it requires obedience. So she fits into this middle place in between. The other thing is that the Old Witch has a lot of interest in the Zepeshi bloodline. She sees them as being critical to the survival of the people of Umbre and those lands. And so she takes great interest during the wars of against Signar and the invasion of Lael. She takes a great interest in Vladimir, who is one of these Umbrian princes, and is keen to make sure his bloodline continues, which does happen. Even though he is ultimately slain, he's slain in the Infernal War, but he does sire a child. In fact, he sires two, one to the Empress and one to Sorcerer. And this child is then sent off through the gateway at Hengehold to another galaxy. And so destiny is not cleaved in two in a weird way. Now, those Infernals that we just mentioned and their invasion. So the Old Witch knows that the only way to stop them, to delay them, because she's fully aware of the deal that Thamar made with them, is to hunt down those who are wicked in their soul and who are the agents of the Infernals. And to do this, to find those people who have sold themselves for power and made themselves beholden to the Infernals, is to call upon that ancient curse of the Defiers. So, through examining Grimkin, learning from the Strangelight workshop, and in particular one particular person known as Lady Corinna Rose, who was in an asylum speaking to Grimkin that would gather around her, invisibly to everyone else. She learned of the connection between Cairn and where the Defiers were within Urken, finding that pathway, and with the help of the founder of the Strangelight Workshop and others, created this occult device that would essentially rip open the wall between worlds and allow the Defiers out and their forces of Grimkin. Unleashing this wicked harvest upon the people of Western Amoran, knowing that, yes, many will be slain, but the price paid of having the Grimkin released would be small compared to the price if the Infernals had won. And as a result, the Infernals, seeing what was going on, had to accelerate their own plans, and they then began their own invasion of Cairn and of Western Amoran, seeking to reap the souls promised to him by Thamar. And so the Old Witch, of course, is involved in those battles, involved in the final battle at Hengehold, ensuring that the bloodline of the Zepeshi bloodline is maintained by sending this child, this star child, the child of sorcerer, through the gateway to another galaxy, another destiny, ensuring that the Empress and her child are also safe. And with the defeat of the Infernals, but it also sees the defeat of her champion, Vlad, the Old Witch then returns to Umbrae to begin her next preparations, because she always has an eye on the future. And this is where the forces of Old Umbrae come into it. So for centuries, the Old Witch has been gathering, stockpiling weapons, arms, and creatures. These primal creatures born of the wilds there. Beast-like, but animated and have heads made of skulls, all that kind of thing that we know of the Old Umbrae forces. She also made use of the liegemen. These are the traditional ancestral forces of the Zepeshi bloodline and the other horse lords of that area. And so gathered to her these warriors, these people who were trained more in the folk traditions of Umbrae, training them for battle, making sure that they were helping prepare stocking supplies. And so in Umbrae, in secrecy, this army has been built over decades, over centuries. Some of her warlocks have found their way through life being within the Cadoran armed forces, being within the Grey Lord's Covenant, gaining training there before returning to her, such as Bowden Lesnoi. And many other of her chosen warriors and mystics are those that she had promised to her in return for her counsel to various tribal leaders and elders over the centuries, so that these children are now training her ways, or at least they themselves are children of those that she has brought up within her own military force that has existed in secrecy in the wilderness. Now, one thing that she was aware of is that she could make use of the powers of the Devourer Worm, but she was always fearful of allowing her forces, her liegemen, from going too far into this feral nature. And while it helped during the repulsion of the original Orgoth forces, she was now posed with a new question of whether to go further, because her staff of whispers was now speaking again, because the Orgoth were returning. Of course, she needed to act fast. Her own armed forces were not as strong as she would have wanted, and what with all the changes that have happened in the Iron Kingdoms, many of those that would have lent their ears to her had now passed on, died as a result of the Infernal Invasion, or died as a result of the subsequent plagues that, also swept across the Iron Kingdoms. So she had to take the choice of calling upon the powers of the Devourer Worm. And her way of doing this was to try and create some sort of allegiance with the Blackclads and with the entity known as Wormwood, this sentient, mystical tree that had many souls sacrificed to it, and from which it provided the power which allowed for skinwalkers. That did not go well, and it did not want to work with her. In fact, it was quite happy if the Orgoth invaded and slaughtered many more people in the Iron Kingdoms. So as a result, she essentially kidnaps, steals Wormwood from the Circle Orboros. She pins it in place, preventing it from teleporting with its magic, and is able to extract from it its sap, this bloody sap. And that, along with all of her knowledge, is what allows her to create true shapeshifters. She is able to feed this to liegemen, and they, as a result, are able to become werewolves, werebears, and thus powerful warriors in combat against the Orgoth. Where before, there was always the danger that if you call upon the Devourer Worm, your warriors would go into a berserker frenzy and would have to be slaughtered after they killed their enemies. Now, such were her teachings and knowledge that there's even those that have drunk from this elixir and thus shapeshifted were able to shift back into their human form once they no longer needed this mystical might. And that's where we are, essentially. That is who the Old Witch is. She is this person, this entity, this ancient creature that through the ages has weaved a path for herself and her people that she cares about, and the people of Kador, fighting against powers that would seek to destroy them, be it Circle Orboros, Orgoth, the Infernals, and making tough decisions such as calling upon the Grimkin to do terrible acts for a greater good that she could perceive. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more, there's more episodes preceding this about the heroes and villains of Warmachine. If you want to know more, go to www.darker-days.org. And of course, we've got stuff on Instagram. Join our Discord for conversations about Warmachine. And I'll see you again soon with another episode of Heroes and Villains of Warmachine. So goodbye for now.